Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41.
Hello guys. Today is the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and to mark that anniversary I wanted to build a kit related to the invasion of Normandy. I wanted to do something slightly different, so I went for this short Stirling, which played a pivotal role in getting British paratroops over to France on the night of the 5th and 6th of June 1944. So first let's look at a bit of history of the Stirling. It's a 4-engine heavy bomber which first entered operational service in the RAF in January 1941. It originally flew both day and night bombing missions and was well known for its ability to take damage and still come home safely. Its crews also praised its turning ability, which allowed it to evade enemy fighters. However, the Stirling had a relatively low service ceiling, and that meant it was often more vulnerable to attack by enemy aircraft. It also had a comparatively short range when fully loaded with bombs, and as I build this kit you'll see that it also has a slightly unique bomb bay, which is divided into 4 along the length of the aircraft. And as the war progressed, these divisions in the bomb bay meant that the Stirling could no longer carry the latest bombs, such as the 4,000-pound cookies, which were being carried by Halifaxes and Lancasters. By the end of 1943, the Stirling had been withdrawn from frontline service, having been replaced by the aforementioned Lancasters and Halifaxes. However, Stirlings did remain in active service until the end of the war, in a number of important roles, including mine laying, electronic countermeasures such as dropping window to confuse German radar, infiltrating SOE agents behind enemy lines, and of course, towing gliders. And it's in that capacity that the Stirling is inextricably linked to the story of the D-Day landings, and that's why I'm building it for this D-Day anniversary video. Operation Tonga was the airborne operation undertaken by the British 6th Airborne Division to secure key objectives on the night of the 5th-6th of June, in particular capturing the bridge which would famously become known as Pegasus Bridge. Throughout the night, Stirlings towed Horsa gliders and dropped paratroopers in multiple waves to support that operation. And of course it should be remembered that in September 1944, 340 Stirlings were involved in getting paratroopers over to Holland for Operation Market Garden. This Stirling kit from Italeri was first released in 2014. This is the Mark IV, which as you can see is the paratroopers transport and glider tug version. Italeri also released the Stirling Mark I in 2015, which is the bomber version. And then they released the Stirling Mark III in 2022, which also includes parts to make a Pathfinder version. Airfix have also released the short Stirling in this scale, but although it's been reboxed in their newer red boxes, this tooling does date to 1966. So the first thing I noticed when I opened the box was the sheer size of the Stirling. As you may have noticed from the reference photos, this is a huge aircraft. It's got a large wingspan, it's long from nose to tail, and the nose sits very high off the ground as well, as you may have seen in some of those photos. We've got an average amount of plastic in this box. There doesn't seem to be a huge number of parts, and one thing I did notice during the build process is that Italeri seemed to have avoided over-engineering pieces wherever possible. We've also got a photo etch sprue, a leaflet advertising their various D-Day related kits, and some decals, including of course the D-Day invasion stripes. My model will have the stripes of course, but I will paint them rather than use the decals. The instructions use what I believe to be Italeri's standard CAD style diagrams. And here you can see something which I noticed straight away as I started construction, which is the amount of detail on the interior of the kit. So we've got obviously the two pilot seats, but behind that we've got plenty of detail in the navigators area and the radio wireless operators area, although unfortunately a lot of that won't be seen. You can also see some detail there in the rear of the aircraft, and there is a small opportunity to see that because we can leave the access door open. In step 16 there you can see those large but separated bomb bay compartments. As the instructions move through building up the undercarriage, the wings, the engines, and then finally assembling everything together. The four paint schemes are presented on the same page. As you can see, there's not a lot of difference between them. We'll look at these in more detail later on, but essentially the only real difference is that the fourth scheme in the bottom right there doesn't have the D-Day invasion stripes, although the stripes on the underside of the wing are indicated as having been painted over. As you would expect, I started with the interior. And although this is very detailed, the part count is relatively small. So this entire floor section here, for example, is one piece, with the division going in between, navigator's table going on, various ductwork going into place, wireless operator's position. All of this was glued into place, minus the seats for the respective crew members. There are a couple of ejector pin marks there that you can see. I didn't fill them because you literally can't see any of this from the outside. We then have this interesting raised floor design for the pilot seats. But luckily that goes on there nice and firmly, everything's nice and square, and there's not much opportunity to get the alignment wrong. Here is the interior minus the seats, and I was massively impressed by this. I thought it was a great amount of detail. Even though it won't be seen, full credit to the Italeri design team for including all of these items in here. And as you can see, as we slot that into the floor and then the side of the fuselage, all of that back detail will be lost. And in fact, even that panel in the roof, the top of the aircraft, is closed up with a solid part. Nevertheless, this section was really fun to build, and really quite easy to put together as well. Italeri give us various photo etch for the interior. We have this instrument panel which fits very neatly over the instrument panel decal, plus some very small and rather fiddly levers here to go on the control panel. They are a nice touch though, they are worth including. And of course we get some photo etch seat belts. At this point we also have to choose between the two slightly different nose versions on the Stirling. We have this version here with the solid area of fuselage between the upper and lower glazing, or this version here where there's actually an intermediate piece of glazing between the upper and the lower piece. I went for the solid version. The Stirling has an interesting dual tailwheel configuration, and that builds up to form part of the detail in the tail of the aircraft. As you can see here from the instructions, we've got a variety of items, including the master compass, and a curtain that divides the sections at the rear. I'm not quite sure how much of that we'll be able to see. Our only viewing point will be through this small door here. We also get the onboard toilet, which sits on this photo etched platform, like so. Here we can see all of that interior detail from nose to tail, minus a few parts that I haven't added yet, such as the toilet, the compass, and the instrument panel and seats. They've all been kept separate for painting. And here is the interior with some paint. This was given a base coat of black, followed by the interior green colour, sprayed slightly inconsistently to give a slightly dirty effect by letting that black show through. All of the details were then picked out by hand with Vallejo model colours. At this point I had to fit the glazing, so I used some PVA glue to do so, hoping that I wouldn't suffer my usual pain of having those pop out on the inside once the fuselage was sealed up. And here is the finished interior. Next up were the flight control surfaces. Here we have the vertical stabilizer, very large on this aircraft. And here we have the horizontal stabilizers and the elevators. And you notice here something that's characteristic across the kit, which is the very detailed but quite deep rivets and panel lines. Personally, I quite like them. I think it adds a bit of detail, but I did have a bit of difficulty later on actually trying to get paint into those because they were so deep. In addition to the fuselage bomb bays, the Stirling also has 3 small compartments in the wings. I got the feeling that this kit was really designed only to have these open, and when you try to put them in a closed position, they fit, but it's very hard to get them nice and smooth, as you can see there. I was very impressed with the undercarriage legs. There were a relatively small number of parts, and they went together extremely well. They were very sturdy. I'd have no fear about these collapsing under the weight of the model. And the way that the parts fitted together to cross-brace each other was very well designed. With those constructed, I was able to paint both the landing gear legs and the landing gear bays. This was done in Tamiya XF71 interior green. I know there's some debate about whether or not they should be green or black. To be honest, I think reference photos show both, and I quite like the contrast with the black underside. The mechanism for securing these legs is quite strong, but you do need to be careful to make sure that the top of the wing will still fit when it's in place. And in fact, I did have to carve off a little bit of these brackets to make sure that would be the case. As you can see here on the initial fit, there's still a bit of a gap. The tail and the horizontal stabilizers were put into place, and just like the wings, these are very heavily riveted. I was quite impressed by the detail here on the rear turret. This is the only turret, of course, that remains on the glider tug version of the Stirling. But you can see there we've got quite a few parts for the interior of that turret, including some photo etch. and these photo-etched shell ejection chutes. As I mentioned earlier, we have these longitudinal bomb bay doors, and like the under-wing bomb bay doors, they were quite hard to fit closed in a smooth fashion. To mask the windows, I used some mascol, just like I did on the Manchester, but I think here my application was a bit better and I didn't have quite the overspill that I had on the Manchester kit. The wings were fitted, and then I had one more photo etched detail which I'd left off deliberately until this point because I knew it would get knocked off, and I would have put it on even later if I could have got away with it, and that is these photo etched actuators for the ailerons. It's a nice detail, but I can pretty much guarantee they'll get knocked off at some point during the painting and masking. Talking of which, the entire kit was given a base coat of XF1 black. I didn't actually prime this kit, and that was probably a mistake because the paint does chip a lot more readily without some primer on the plastic first. Now I must admit I was a bit dubious about this camo scheme that Italeri provides because it doesn't look like a standard A or B camouflage scheme that Bomber Command used during World War II. There are a few aspects that just look a bit odd. So for example, on the trailing edge of the port wing there, that large horizontal area of green doesn't look normal to me. The green around the rear of the cockpit and the fact that it sort of goes back and then back towards the front again in kind of a V shape also looked a bit strange to me. However, I did do some research, and while I found plenty of images of Stirlings in other more standardised camo schemes, I did see some images with them in this scheme. So I figured it's at least feasible, and I decided to follow it. The RAF Dark Earth was therefore the first colour to go down, just roughly where the brown should be, and just like in my recent Manchester build, if I overlap into the green area a little bit, that doesn't worry me too much. Then I used my favourite masking material, which is Tamiya masking sheet, to cut out sections and cover up, mask off the brown. Once that was done, the AK Real Colours RAF Dark Green was applied, and I could remove the masking tape. And thankfully, despite not using any primer, none of the paint came up with the tape. I felt it would be much easier and much better to mask off the D-Day invasion stripes rather than use the decals. The decals had the stripes at 9mm wide, my Tamiya masking tape is 10mm wide, so I went with 10mm wide stripes to make things easier. Everything got a coat of white, and then the white was masked off using a piece of tape as a spacer for the two black stripes. This was all a relatively quick process, and I think it looks really good masked like that. And as predicted, I did knock off at least two of those actuators for the ailerons. Probably the fiddliest part of this build, and the only one that really caused me any frustration, was these engine cowlings. As you can see, if we try to just push them on, there's nothing really to keep them in position or keep them straight. And although the instructions don't make this clear, that's because you really rely on the engine component going inside them, and that connects to the wing, not the cowling. So the cowling's sort of floating, being held on by the engine piece. Equally, we have this air intake on the top, and as you can see, it does have this clip at the back, which looks quite deliberate. It looks like it's supposed to raise the rear off the wing. But that has the intakes pointing slightly downwards, and the reference photos don't seem to show that, so I clipped that off to give it a smooth intersection with the engine nacelle. As you've seen, I've gone for a colour scheme which has the D-Day stripes. In terms of our 4 marking options, I don't really mind what code letters I use, but I do like the individual aircraft names. So option A is the Saint, option B is Shooting Stars, and option D is the one that I would like to go for, the Glorious Beer. Now, Glorious Beer, according to our marking scheme, doesn't have D-Day stripes, but that's okay, I just did mine with the stripes. The option in the instructions has the stripes painted over, so they were there at some point. With a gloss coat down in the appropriate places, I used some Tamiya Mark Fit and put the decals on. The roundel decals here seem to be a lot bigger than the instructions would suggest, so I use my own common sense in terms of their alignment. The marker here for the lifeboat is a lot brighter red than the roundel red, which I found slightly strange. But apart from that, the decals did go down well, and we even get a few stencils. Once those decals were dry, everything was given a coat of VMS matte varnish, and at that point I think everything was looking really good. I then took my faithful sepia oil paint from Abteilung 502, thinned it with some odorless thinner, and applied a pin wash to the main panel lines on the model. I didn't apply this pin wash to all those individual rivets because I thought the effect would be a bit too stark, and as a result of the black base coat, I think those rivets still do show up to a large degree. You can see as I applied this panel line wash, it does just add that extra emphasis to those panel lines. And if we compare, for example, the finished port wing with the unfinished starboard wing, hopefully you can see a difference there, subtle though it is. As always, a brush lightly dampened in odorless thinner was used to clean up any excess, dragging it back in the direction of the airflow. I then used a technique which I've used a lot on armour models before, but never really on aircraft for some reason, and that's the oil paint dot filter. I applied dots of a couple of light dusty colours and some darker brown-black colours, and streaked them back across the wings, again in the direction of airflow. The effect of that is to provide a bit of dirt and grime streaking, a little bit of fading to some of the panels, and just a general breakup of the uniformity of those colours. I applied that on both wings, on the horizontal stabilisers and along the top of the fuselage. Then it was just a case of adding some of the final details. While I do that, let me say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. These guys give ongoing support to the channel every month, and it's massively appreciated, so thank you very much guys, and I really do enjoy the discussions that we have on the Patreon page and the YouTube member page about future builds and suggestions and so on. So thank you for your support. And with those details added, my build was complete. And there we go guys, that was my D-Day anniversary build of the Italeri short Stirling. in its paratrooper transport / glider tug configuration. I really enjoyed building this kit. I particularly enjoyed the interior and the level of detail that was there. I also liked the parts breakdown and the fact that the parts count was relatively low. This was actually quite a quick build. The only niggle for me was the engine nacelles, which didn't quite assemble onto the engine pieces particularly well, but I got there in the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. I would like to thank you for watching, and many thanks to all of you who watched my Avro Manchester build and gave very positive feedback on that. It's much appreciated, guys, so thank you very much. I seem to be on a bit of an aircraft run at the moment. I've actually got another aircraft in progress, but I've also got the M3 half-track still to finish. One of those will be my next build video, but I haven't decided which yet. If you do want to find out, please do remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and any likes or comments that you leave on my videos are greatly appreciated. Until my next video, thank you again for watching and have fun modelling.